All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Will the Ethics Movement Be Televised? Evolve Your Program or Be Left Behind. And you can thank Asha for that title, and if you want to know what it means, please call her afterwards. But I am joined by a wonderful panel here today, and I would like to have them introduce themselves. We've got Will, Cheryl, and Asha joining me for this conversation. So Cheryl, please go ahead and introduce yourself to start with.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Cheryl Wall. I'm the Senior Vice President, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer for the Metro Health System in Cleveland, Ohio. And yes, we did get about 6 inches of snow yesterday. It'll be in the 70s probably by Friday. So I've been in healthcare my whole career. I'm a lawyer by background. And I actually am a recovered lawyer now that I've been in the compliance world for about the last 15 years. As you know, healthcare has been quite challenged in the last year with the COVID pandemic, and trying to maintain a robust program to keep our employees engaged as they're exhausted, dealing with death and dying every day. And also trying to keep themselves safe and optimistic has been a challenge, and I hope to discuss some of that today.
Excellent, thank you. Asha, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, I guess it's ladies first today, huh? Asha Palmer. I am Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Conversant. So I get to work with Philip every day. I also get to do fun things like create titles for sessions about evolution. My background is in compliance as well as at DOJ. I too, like Cheryl, am a recovering lawyer. But you know what we at Conversant truly believe is that we have to help and use technology to evolve programs. And we'll get into a lot of those topics today, but it is exciting to be here, but also to understand how we as partners, we get to partner with Cheryl and Will on a daily basis as customers, but how we as partners evolve our programs so that we can enhance our culture and the outcomes that we all seek that help our business. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Asha. And you can blame my mother for that. She beat that into me at a very young age, ladies first. Will, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Absolutely, Philip, and I'm of the same background and upbringing, so we'll never beat you over the head on that one. My name is Will Simmons. I'm the head of global investigations for Lonza. I'm also the associate director for the ethics and compliance group. So I oversee all the hotline administration as well as third-party due diligence, training and communications, ERM, and all the other fun things that come in the compliance world. So by background, former military officer with special investigations with the Air Force, have served in a variety of roles within the pharma industry, from manufacturing to quality to audit to investigations. But really looking forward, this topic, as you know, this group is bringing forth is key. It's evolved greatly within the last 2 to 3 to 5 years in a level that I don't think anybody ever anticipated. COVID obviously kind of impacted that greatly, but really looking forward to sharing the thoughts. We've had some conversations before, and I think everybody will really enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, Will. So to set some context for this conversation, let's just tee it off. First of all, sorry, I'm Philip Winterburn. I am Chief Strategy Officer at Conversant by OneTrust now, and looking forward to this discussion. I have a passion, obviously, for ethics and for what's happening in the world today. So let's talk about that, because this transition that we're seeing in ethics and compliance is happening within the framework of what we'll call loosely the stakeholder capitalism movement. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is this emergence of stakeholder capitalism that was recognized in 19, the rise of ESG, the awareness that we now have a choice of where we work, we have a choice of where we consume and who we consume from. And because we have a choice, we're holding those organizations very much accountable for their brand promise. And so because of that accountability culture, which is also being fueled by the social movement culture that we're seeing with items like Black Lives Matter coming to the fore in 2020. There's this increased awareness of my brand, who I am as an organization, and the culture within the company that we're operating within. And I think it has created probably one of the biggest opportunities for the ethics and compliance profession that we've ever had since it started, because it's a way to completely transform from the old school way of thinking just about the law. Is it legal to do this? Catch the perpetrators who breached the law and carry on your merry way, to this new world of how do we partner with the business? How do we actually be part of that strategic conversation of how to influence the direction of the business? And how do we sit at the table as peers with our business colleagues and really help drive the brand, empower the brand forward, rather than just focusing purely on protecting it? So as we go through this discussion, we're going to touch on a few different areas, but we're going to start with the transition that we've seen in how we're using data. And we see this with several of our clients in how they're using analytics now, people building out analytics teams and data science capabilities. And so I'm interested, we'll start there and just have a discussion about how are we using data and how has that changed over the last few years?
Well, I'll jump in here. How many of you have a code of conduct with your organization? Does it look something like this, a pretty document with nice pictures and maybe a spiral binding? How do you know what sections of your code anybody's looking at? Are they looking at the gifts and entertainment section? How would you know if it's a paper document? And so I think part of how we use data is understanding how we're engaging with employees and what is important to the employees that we're serving. And having a document that lays out all of the expectations of standards of behavior that we have for employees is important, as it serves as the foundation for our compliance programs, but it doesn't really tell us where we may have some areas of opportunity, where we may need to do additional training, where our employees have questions, because we can't track what they're looking at when it's a paper document. So one of the commitments that we've made at Metro Health is to convert our code to an interactive code and to put it online. And it was online before. It was a PDF document that you could navigate and had some interactivity to it. But now through an interactive code, we can embed videos, we can actually see where employees are going within the code, and it allows us to have so much more information to then target our communication, our education, and everything that we do based on the needs of our employees.
So, go ahead, Will.
No, I think Cheryl just hit so many major points right there. Areas of opportunity and how do we target them and how do we do this? So I'm going to use my favorite example ever is ice cream and violent crimes. So in the summer, ice cream sales go up. In the summer, violent crimes go up. And I have the statistics to prove that. I can look at the sales to show that ice cream goes up, sales go up in the summer, and FBI says that violent crimes go up in the summer. So therefore, ice cream causes violent crimes, right? That's the data that I have. That's what it shows. What Cheryl is saying is spot on. The areas of opportunity where you're taking your code and you've moved it from this paper-based, and all I have is some little PDF or little Post-it notes here, but you've taken it from this paper-based program and you've put it online, and that's awesome. That's the greatest thing. But how are you tracking it now? And as Cheryl said, now you're looking at where your employees are going, what they are engaging in, and what they're doing. So if you launch a training, but people are searching for something else, now you're able to see that, and you're not having that blind spot where you're saying, so then you can focus those unlimited resources that every ethics and compliance group has, and that unlimited budget that you have to go after that. No, instead you can say, hey, this is where we're seeing our employees engaging, and this is where we target this, and you can be a little bit more surgical in it. So I think it's awesome, but my caveat to that is be very cognizant of the data that you're pulling into, because like I said, with ice cream and violent crimes, You can put those together. Correlation is not causation, but as Cheryl said, is having those areas of focus where you're looking at it and you're focusing on it can enhance your program tremendously, because then you're being surgical and you're going after the needs of the employees, which ultimately is better for the business.
And if I can add there, I think Will made a good point about correlation, right? And my favorite word is layering data, right? Trying to figure out correlations. And I've seen a lot of our customers at Conversant trying to correlate data and figure out what is causation, what are some of the root causes, what are some of the things that are causing other things. That's new. We used to, that is an evolution, right? We used to just report data. Now we are starting to analyze data. And that is a huge evolution in the ethics and compliance space. And we have to continue evolving. And I tell a lot of our customers, right? They're like, well, I don't know if there's causation. But that's the next step, right? That's a hypothesis, right? As Will said, if we're talking about ice cream and gun, test it, right? I don't know, go buy a bunch of people ice cream, see if it moves the gun sales, right? Or the violent crime. Like, we have to begin to test our hypothesis. So if we have a risk area, send them with some training. If we have a lot of people coming to one section in our code, what does that mean and what's going on in that region? And when you start to have those conversations with your business partners, you're seen as so much more than the police, and actually as partners in trying to figure out and manage risk effectively. But it starts with the data.
Fascinated, Cheryl, in using that, because it's the ability to also have this canary in the coal mine, because you can start to see incidents or concerns raising even before anyone reports anything, because you can see where clusters of people are going in the code. Have you experienced any of that as you're looking at your data?
So our interactive code went live in February. And so we don't have a year's worth, we only have a couple of months so far. But just in that short period of time, we have seen a concentration of employees looking at the section of our code that deals with bullying, intimidation, and sort of bad behavior. One particular department, we've seen an increase in access of that particular section. And they're spending, we can also analyze how much time they're spending on that page, average of 6 minutes. So that tells us a lot. If somebody is spending 6 minutes, they're reading through the entire page, they're looking at the examples. And then we can reach out to that area and talk to the management team. We can pull in some employees. We don't actually have to wait for our hotline to ring to know that there's a problem.
Yeah, so it's real insights into your culture and in the organization in real time. That's fascinating. Will, what are you guys doing around that? Because I know you're doing something similar.
So very similar to Cheryl, is we just launched our ECP. So we have a very customized website, and it features every aspect of our code of conduct. And we just launched that approximately 20 days ago. And we're already seeing the same thing that Cheryl's seeing, is where we can dig down and say, like, hey, we just launched the training on X, but everybody's searching for non-retaliation, or everybody's searching for conflicts of interest. So it's really interesting. And Philip, you brought up in the canary in the coal mine. And it's really great that you're not calling when there's a problem, to Cheryl's point, when the hotline's already rung. And now you're coming to say, hey, we have an issue, we have to investigate it. When you're bringing forth and saying, I have a lot of smoke, but I don't have any fire at this point. Let's take a look at what's going on. And you just have that transparency from a business sense and a force multiplier. That's great, because then you're building a relationship with the business, and you're not the bringer of bad news, which I unfortunately feel like I am all the time. Like, hey, we have an issue and this is what's going on. You're more so, this is kind of what we're seeing. This is what the data is showing. I'm not just making this up out of thin air. Let's take a look at it. Have you had changes in the business? Have you had restructuring? And in one of our sites, they had a massive restructuring of the leadership organization. That caused a lot of churn in the industry. But by coming to them and saying, hey, there's something going on, people are looking at this, they're not feeling right, they were able to get out, have a town hall, and we're talking within 15 days of getting this data, is turn around and say, hey, let's address this right at the bat. So you're being predictive, you're being proactive, and you're stopping something before it comes to the hotline, and then you're coming to the business with a problem. And not to say that you're not coming to the business with solutions, but it's a lot better to come out with those solutions before there is a problem.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of questions come in that we'll address as we're on the topic. So one is, are these interactive codes public or only internal? And I know from a customer general standpoint, we have a variety. Some people use them just internally. Some people are actually publishing them both internal and external because they want to have that transparency. I'm not sure what the two of you have chosen to do and why. So maybe you could talk about that for a moment.
So right now, our interactive code is private. It's only available inside our firewall. And largely because we wanted to rely on the information to know that when we look at the data, it's information about what our employees are doing and looking at and how they're interacting with the code. If we had it publicly available, it does tell us what region someone is in, and actually within our Cleveland area, it'll tell us actually like the name of the town where someone is accessing our code. But it would have caused a lot more guesswork if we had made it publicly available. So we're starting out with just internally available. And one of the questions was, is it just how much time they spent? And it's actually much broader than that. It can be which sections they're looking at. Specifically, if there are interactive features, what they're clicking on. Their region, we can drill down to department level, more specific demographics about the user and what that tells us.
Yeah, I think I've also seen people tracking, how long they stay in the videos. So are people watching the whole video all the way through, or are they watching 5 seconds and bailing because it's not really grabbed them, which gives you great feedback on how good your content is and is it holding people's attention or not.
And to point out, the way these are structured, is push and pull. So, there's two kind of different data points that you're able to get from such an interactive code. And so it's, if you're pushing a message out, say, whether it's in your annual training, or if it's for a specific department that has an upcoming risk, right? And you push the training out to them and no one clicks on it, right? You're like, and no one goes to that section. You're like, okay, well, I have a bigger problem because now the gap in risk and mitigation is bigger, right? And so you can track where people are going voluntarily. You can also guide people to data in ways that you can really understand if they're understanding it. Are they interested in it? Does it matter to them? Are they going kind of a few levels deeper than what you guided them to? So those are the kind of things that you can pull out when you decide to push information out as well.
One more question, and then let's move the topic a little bit. So Bianca, you asked if these are in-house built solutions. So both Metro Health and Lonza are Conversant products. They're built on our ethics and compliance portal, the ECP. Some people do choose to build their own, but we believe we can give you a better value proposition by helping you get there. So call your nearest Conversant sales rep and they will help you out. I wish I had a 1-800-ECP helpline, but I don't. Anyway, so let's talk about now moving beyond the sort of interactive code of conduct, other data that we're using to actually tell a different story. And Will, I know you do a lot of benchmarking analysis that you do with your board, and maybe some other data that you're using. So could you share a little bit about that? And let's get into beyond ECP world. What are we looking at, to Asha's point, to layer data?
Absolutely. And I think that's where the hotline data and the insights into your investigations is what's coming into the hotline is so important. And in the last 3 years, I've seen that evolve tremendously from, we had this type of report come in from this type of location, and it was substantiated, non-substantiated, substantiation undetermined. Okay, let's dig into that a little bit more. How did it come in? Was it anonymous? Was it non-anonymous? Was it a proxy report? Was it through the web? Was it through the text message capability? What is driving this report? What is creating this? And then you pull that back and you're able to get all these data points of this hotline, and it gives you a real picture of the company, and it gives you a real picture of the culture and of the feeling of it. Are you seeing a spike after performance reviews of employee relations matters? But really, I think one of the most salient points on this is it allows you to see the comfort level your employees have speaking up. And if you're seeing a tremendous amount of folks come in and fully disclosing their identity, that is tremendous. And that's something that your board wants to know. That's something that your senior leaders need to know, is there's a culture that, hey, I feel comfortable bringing forth and identifying myself. Conversely to that, if you're seeing a region where we have a tremendous amount of anonymous reports, what's driving that? Is it cultural? Is it site management? Is it fear of retaliation? It allows you to take these data points and then shift and focus. And I say this from our own point, is we saw a region that had horrible reporting numbers, absolutely horrible reporting numbers. And we recognized this was an issue because when we presented this and put all these data points together, it showed region 1, great. Region 2, great. Region 3, we're not getting anything out there. Does that mean I was going home and thinking, we're doing a great job, we have no issues, I don't need to look at it? Absolutely the opposite. I'm going, why aren't people bringing forth issues? So we focused a campaign to educate our employees that if you see something, say something, feel comfortable speaking up. In 3 months of that campaign, we had more reporting in that 3 months post-launch of that campaign than we did for the last 18 months prior to that. Why? Because the data told us we had an issue, and we used that to convince the leadership that, hey, this is what we're going to do, and this is what's going to happen from it. And it generated results. So these data points that you're collecting aren't just nice to have. They can really shape how you do your training, how you do your communications, how you focus the, again, probably limited resources, as I think we all on the same boat, is how you focus these, and it generates results. And then those results go to the board, go to your senior leaders. More importantly, though, they fix an issue and they actually help the business. And that's what you need to take away, is data helps the business.
Absolutely.
And if I can add to that, I mean, you just told us a story, right? And like, data tells a story. And it tells a story of value. It tells a story of risk management. It tells a story of, and you can't tell a story. I have a first grader right now, so I'm learning all about, the elements of a key story, right? Like, it has to have characters. It has to have a who, what, when, where, why, how, all of those things to make a full story. And your data has to do the same. Your data has to tell the story to the board, to the management, to the business units, what is happening, why you believe it's happening, how you can help them not let it happen again if it's a bad thing, right? If it's a good thing, also give them kudos on that. And filling in those blanks of really, what does the story your data tells? And you can only tell that full story when you layer the data and look at those other inputs together as a whole. In the time that they happened.
Absolutely.
I just want to bring together a few points because Asha and Will mentioned these things earlier, and I think it brings everything sort of full circle. The concept of layering data and correlation is not causation. And you can't just look at one data source alone. So you can look at your hotline data, and that might tell you something about the number of anonymous calls or the lack of calls. But then if you have other data, so I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, Philip, but if you do a culture survey or you do an employee engagement survey and you get feedback through that information or that survey that tells you employees are not comfortable reporting, or they're afraid of retaliation, or they don't know how to report. They don't know, what the means to report are. If you combine that data with this other data that you have, then you might be able to make that correlation to arrive at the root cause. And so it's the combination of all of that that allows you to react in a much more informed way so that you know what's going on, or at least, you feel a little bit more informed.
And that, use a key phrase in there, root cause. It's getting to what's the story behind the story, right? And that's part of this transformation we're seeing, is rather than showing up to the board and saying, here's my helpline trends and here's my training statistics and here's my policy attestations and are they doing a great job? No, we're showing up with a story of what's going on behind the story, what's happening in the organization, and actually having a real conversation about the values people have and how they're making decisions, right? The people who are cutting corners, where is the culture weak in the organization? So those are the types of conversations we're starting to have. So since, yes, you did jump ahead there, Cheryl, but I will talk to you about that later. Let's jump into culture, because it's such a powerful point for me, at least, as we're all looking, we talked about through 2020, this resilient business. How do we create a resilient organization and long-term sustainable organizations? To me, that all stems from culture. And historically, we may have looked at sustainable businesses from a purely financial, or resilience from a purely financial point of view. I think we learned in 2020 there's more than that. And that they're really behind it all is the strength of your culture. If your culture is strong, it will see you through hard times. And so in ethics and compliance, I think in the past, we've often failed to look into culture and seen that as being someone else's job. Whereas today, I think leading organizations are really embracing that and saying, you know, this is at the heart of how people behave. And if we can measure and influence culture, we can actually help this organization drive forwards. So I'm interested in all of your thoughts around, A, how do we measure culture? And then how do we start to influence it?
So Philip, I think, you hit the nail on the head there in saying that, for quite a while, I think in the E&C space, culture has been somebody else's issue. And it's been, is it HR? Is it whoever it is? It's like that. What I think the evolution has been now is culture drives the business, and it drives the people and what they're doing and how they're acting and how they're behaving across the board. So it's far beyond the financial performance of the company. It's how they're getting that financial performance. And if you have short, fleeting success because people are doing the wrong thing and cutting corners, you're not long for this world across the board. And I think we've seen that with a lot of industries over the last 10 years, but especially now in the culture aspect. But it comes down to your people and what they're doing. And I think the E&C space really falls into the mission first, but people always, and trying to make sure that, yeah, we're going to meet our mission objectives, our business objectives across the board, but we're doing it by taking care of our people and making sure that they feel comfortable, speaking up and doing the right thing. And so the shift is now where, instead of ethics and compliance coming in and saying, don't do this, that's the bad thing to do, and here's your punishment and everything else like that, you more want to have this mindset where another employee says, that's not how we do things here. And why? Where does that stem from? That stems from the education, from the training, from the backing that is promulgated by the E&C group. But really, it is the culture of the organization to say, we're going to do things the right way. And if we mess up, we're going to take we'll take our lumps and we'll go forward. But we're going to bring it forth and identify that. And I think that onus has come on the E&C, and that's training, that's comms, that's being transparent, that's reporting things, and it's explaining why doing the right thing is actually a business multiplier and a force multiplier. And I think over the last few years, especially last year, I think we can all agree, every business should have, if they haven't, recognized that people are the driving force. And a culture of integrity and a culture of strength is going to allow the business not only survive critical times like we had before, but actually thrive in them.
Absolutely. Cheryl, your thoughts?
I was just going to say, if Will has any vacancies on his team, you're going to get an influx of resumes after this, because who wouldn't want to work for someone like that? That was tremendous. I think, this is an opportunity, and Philip, you said this at the outset, things have shifted. And, we went through a pandemic with COVID last year, but we've also been experiencing a pandemic related to racial inequities. And if compliance has not involved itself in those discussions, in that training effort, in that movement to build more inclusive practices into your organization, then you've sort of missed the boat. I would say it's not too late. You can still get on board with that. But here's an opportunity to bring together all of the things that Will just mentioned: the transparency, the speak up culture, the anti-retaliation policy. Bring all of that together and use it as part of your discussions related to inclusion, diversity, racial equity, gender equity, sexual orientation equity. I mean, there's so many areas that we can focus on. And I just feel like it's leadership's responsibility to have a role to engage in these discussions on culture. And this is an opportunity for compliance to help guide the organization and to be in the forefront of something that permeates every employee, every aspect of your business, and helps with retention. I mean, there's actually a return on investment that you could talk about. I get really jazzed when we start talking about culture because, it goes back to the age-old comment, culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast or whatever it was. But I think compliance has to have a role. And so there was a question, who owns culture in your organization? I have, in the last year, been very intentional about building the relationship with our HR team and the HR leader. And that has paid dividends. So we are lockstep, working together, sharing information, sharing data. So you can look at your hotline data and you can see how many cases of retaliation you may be getting. But what is HR getting? What is their data showing? And if you haven't aggregated that and brought it together, then you don't really have a full picture of what's going on in your organization. And you only have the snapshot of what you see. And so I think there's opportunities for us to really strengthen the function of compliance by partnering with other leaders within your organization. Your chief strategist, Philip, I know you and Asha have a great working relationship, but how many of you as ethics and compliance officers are really aligned with your chief strategist, and what you're doing in compliance in sync with what your organization's strategic goals are?
Yeah, I think so many good points there, and obviously touching on the inequities that we have, and yesterday was a major moment for us in that journey. And Asha, I think you have some comments or thoughts you'd like to share.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Cheryl, which is like, what are we working toward to define our culture, to make sure it's consistently, enforced and applied and authentic. And I think those things are so key. Like, no one department can do it on its own. And it's so interesting. I mean, I posed in the chat, who owns culture, right? That's like the laughing stock, because people, it's almost like the tug of war that people are fighting over, right? But it's so interdependent to tell the full story. And the thing, it's been so interesting to me working at Conversant, I've had the best interdependency within departments that I've ever had at any company. Now we're smaller and we were all in a pandemic holding on to each other, but there's still a willingness and an attitude and a discussion sometimes within an organization that needs to happen to say, we're all in this together, right? Because there will be some things that Asha takes the lead on as Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. There will be things our Chief People Officer takes the lead of. There will be certain things that, learning and development takes the lead on. But once we do those things that we're leading, we have to come back and share the data and the information that we have in order to evolve. When George Floyd was killed, we all were paralyzed as to how to address that within our culture, how to be consistent with our values within our culture, how to stand up for what is right without isolating individuals within the company that may not agree with certain things that everyone else in the company does, right? There has to be a space and a place for everyone, and a space for conversation, not confrontation, that enhances your culture of respect and accountability. That doesn't mean you have to handle or tolerate anything demeaning, but you need to give the space and the place so people can be the individuals and trust that the organization has their best interests at heart. And I think that comes with those cross-departmental partnerships that you're talking about, that pushing and pulling of each other. You know, we all don't get it right the first time, but what if we're doing it together, we're more likely to get there. And that to me is the evolution I've seen. Compliance, ethics and compliance, we've been siloed. We can't stay in our corners when nobody wants to sit with us at the lunch table. We have to create these business partnerships that enhance our culture, which at the end of the day, builds and maintains our trust.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I think when you say, you know, who owns culture, to me, that's like who owns ethics, who owns compliance. It's the responsibility of everybody. And we each have a responsibility to influence it in our own unique ways, in our own areas. And Cheryl, you have this great relationship with HR, and you shared some of that earlier with us, and Will too. So I'm interested. Let's just go a little more deep on the actual culture survey work. Because Cheryl, you had some great sort of, I think, best practices almost that we can share with the audience in terms of how you partner with HR doing both culture and engagement surveys and gathering that intelligence. So maybe you can talk us through a little bit of that.
We historically have only done employee engagement surveys. So questions like, do you feel like you're compensated fairly? Do you feel like your manager cares about you? Would you recommend Metro Health as a best place to work? We've done those surveys year over year and typically partnering with a third party. So when I approached our HR team about wanting to do a very detailed culture survey beyond just the 10 to 12 questions that we would ask at the end of our compliance training, you know, they had a lot of questions about, well, you know, what does this mean? How does this relate to the engagement survey? And so we formed a team that examined every single question. We extracted some of the questions from our employee engagement survey the prior year so that we could see year over year data on certain questions on the employee engagement survey. And then we expanded, and you know, we have 8 pillars, actually 9 pillars of data that we cover. And we've decided we're going to alternate years. So one year we'll do the employee engagement, the next year we'll do culture. And so it's even and odd years. And when we do the engagement survey, we will add some of our culture survey questions so that we can look at year over year data on that. So we've got consultants that we're working with on our diversity and inclusion activity. We've had them assess not just our culture survey data, but some other information that we've gleaned from employees through focus groups, through site visits, where we've gathered all this data, and we've asked our third party to help us pull out the themes and identify our action steps. And so we're working hand in hand with HR to address some of the areas that we have opportunities in under the culture survey. And my biggest advice would be not to survey your employees or ask for their feedback and then sit on your hands and do nothing. That would be, you know, the biggest problem, and you'll never get good results after that. You'll never get people participating in those surveys.
So would you like to sort of share what you guys do from a standpoint and your takeaways from the earlier conversations we had with Cheryl? Because I know you were like, that's a great idea. So what are your thoughts?
So I think Cheryl just hit the nail on the head in this regards. If you have the data and you don't do anything about it, twofold in this regard. How is that going to look when a regulator comes in and you've had all this data that you haven't done anything? Okay, that's one aspect. That's from the regulatory perspective to it. Cheryl even more so hit the point. Your employees will never trust you again if they expressed their feelings and their thoughts, and they saw no change across the board. And I think this is where communication and transparency comes forward, because maybe the fix that they want is not a possible fix. Maybe it's not logical. Maybe it's just not going to happen across the board. But if you let them know that we have heard you, and this is what we're doing, and this is why we can't do X, Y, and Z, that carries so much more weight than it just going to this black hole across the board. And then they just feel completely disenfranchised. They don't feel like they have any voice in the thing. I think too, with this cultural survey, is you're going to have hard conversations, because no one wants to go to an EC member. No one wants to go to a board member and say, you think everything is fine here, but here's what the data actually shows. So have those hard conversations. Come to those conversations. I tell my team this all the time. You can come with me with every problem you have, but you need 3 solutions. They may be terrible solutions, but you came to me with 3 solutions and you had that idea. So when you get this data, and if it's not the prettiest data or anything else like that, come up with solutions and find reasons to fix it across the board. But have those hard conversations, and don't hide that data down. And most importantly, don't not do anything with that data across the board. Find a way to use it. And it may be just having an open communication. We have heard what you have said. Here is what we're doing, and here's the why. You're not going to make everybody happen. The minute you try to start making everybody happen, you're going to end up treading water, and then you're going to drown. That's just how it's going to go across the board. And I think too, is when you're looking at this cultural survey, when you're looking at these questions, is don't cherry pick the questions. Don't formulate it so you know you're going to get the response that you want to have. So, hey, everything is good to go, and we're nothing to see here. Let's just keep moving on. Ask the tough questions. So that's a little bit after the fact, but tough questions get tough answers sometimes, and just transparency and being open about it, but having solutions and thinking about it. And Cheryl hit a point before that I want to really harp on, was involve. And be involved and have that relationship with your HR business partners across the board. And if you don't have a seat at the table, get a seat at the table. And how you do that, you don't force your way in, kick the door in, or anything else like that, but you explain, again, business proposition, how this is a value add, and how you can support that various function, be it HR, sales, marketing, across the board. But Cheryl's point on being involved, that stems and that spurns everything right there.
And I think what both of you guys are saying is so important, because we look at quantitative data sometimes, right? It's like, how many charts do I have that I could take to my board, right? And like all of the things you guys just talked about are qualitative data points that you need to tell the story of the quantitative data points, right? And I love the idea of focus groups and thinking about all the place that data can come from, right? And that it's not just static figures or pulling data out of a system. It's talking to people. It's writing down what they say in a systematic way, and then telling them what you're doing about it, following up with them to check on it. It's those kind of things. And I know it, when we're resource strapped, we tend to lean to quantitative or over rotate to quantitative, but there is a balance that we have to achieve to either affirm, right, the quantitative stuff we're seeing, or hear the real story and kind of understand the full picture.
If I could add something to that, Asha, because you've touched on this a couple of times, storytelling, and you've referenced the fact that your data has to tell a story, and I couldn't agree more. But I also want to point out the impact and importance of telling a story, not just your data story, but a story. So, and how hearing people's stories and experiences can drive changes in culture. So a quick story. Our name badges at Metro Health have our legal name. And your first name is in big letters and your last name is in smaller letters. Well, we have lots of employees who use different names, nicknames, or we have employees who are undergoing gender changes and they have a name preference. And yet we've been inflexible in allowing people to choose the name that goes on their badge. And so by telling a story about how that has impacted an individual has brought about change. And we're now working on the plan to allow employees to update their badge with their preferred name. That's a simple thing. It's an easy example, but we told the story about how it impacted negatively this employee. Every day, people would call her by the name that she no longer wanted to be used as her name. And you know, that's just one example. We had another situation. I'll tell one more story quickly. We received a hotline call about an employee who shared with a coworker that she was concerned. She shared photos of her 5-month-old baby, and she was concerned that the baby's father was a little too hands-on, a little too rough with the baby. And the photos showed bruising all over the baby's bottom. And we posed that question to our compliance committee. We altered the facts. The facts I just told you were altered from the actual situation. But how do you handle this? Do you call the authorities? Do you have an obligation to call the authorities? You know, this could happen at any organization, not just a healthcare organization. And, you know, this is an ethical question. Do you bring some help to this employee? There were all sorts of other questions about whether she felt safe at home. And so we connected her with our employee assistance program, with counselors, with additional people who could help her. And it had a positive ending. But the impact that one story had on helping educate other employees and managers about how to handle the tough situations that their employees are experiencing was so impactful. I got notes and emails from our compliance committee members saying that was the best discussion I've been engaged in 6 months.
Both of those are very powerful stories, and reminds us of the humanity that's involved in the jobs that we do every day. That at the end of the day, it's about a person in an experience, potentially in distress, and how can we help them. I think the sharing of these stories, because when we were talking earlier, it was about telling stories with data to the board, to your peers. There's also the telling the stories out to the organization to illustrate the power of the programs that you have in place to help and support people and to get people to engage in the ethics and compliance program, engage in the culture. And I think that's something you do. Obviously, that was an example quite strongly at Metro Health. I'm interested, can you share a little bit more about the philosophy? Because I know some organizations don't share anything. They have this fear of any story we tell, there's legal liability here, we can't tell anything about this happened. And so how have you structured that, and what successes have you had with actually using real life stories, adapted potentially a little bit, to educate people around the power of the program?
Well, we also have a close partnership with our colleagues in legal. So, we do vet our plans when we think it could be controversial with our legal colleagues, and marketing as well, because they're the true storytellers. They're the ones who are gifted in putting these things into words. I think it's a risk tolerance level of your organization that you have to evaluate. And what we have found is that the use of storytelling is so much more effective, not just in compliance, but in everything that we do. And so as we've tackled some of these issues of racial tension and inequity head on, we've had videos, and they're out there on metrohealth.org. You can go watch them. They're publicly available, about our employees telling their experiences with racism and discrimination. And there wasn't one video that I watched where I wasn't crying. These are so powerful and just moving. And it causes you to want to do better, to make a difference, to take action. And so I think we have experienced the power of storytelling in many facets of the organization that allows us to utilize it across the board.
Yeah, fantastic.
And if I can add to that, Philip, there's such power in stories because it creates the human connection, right? And I think that's why in our profession over the history we've seen, just talking about laws, doesn't work. And I had a session yesterday with some law students, and I told them about anti-bribery and corruption, right? It's one thing to say, don't, pay a foreign government public official to obtain or retain business, blah, 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 right? Like, we all know the language of FCPA by now and can regurgitate it, right? But that doesn't create a connection. People are still bribing. People are still bribing, right? But the real story behind bribery is that it erodes communities, right? And that if you see the communities where people are accepting these bribes, they're stealing resources and funding that would otherwise go to very poor individuals, communities, natural resources, preserving. I mean, there's so much bad about bribery other than the money handed to the government official, right? And for people who, whatever it is your industry, whatever your connection is to the why bribery is terrible, tell that story because that's going to make someone think twice about hiding in the marketing budget the bribe they paid so they could fly their airplane out of that country, right? And so just to begin to humanize our why, right? Why are we in ethics and compliance, right? It really is to help people do better and help our organizations be better and be contributors to the world in a positive light. And they can also make money. And so are you telling that story of of how that's achievable in doing the right thing, but also doing it the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. The why thing was something that occurred to me earlier as well with Cheryl. I know your surveys that you do are fairly extensive, and it's more than, you're not just asking the question of would you or wouldn't you, you then ask the second question of why. And that's so revealing if we can understand the why behind behavior. So it's fascinating. Will, a little bit ago, you mentioned the comms plan, the comms side of this, and it sort of feeds into this storytelling. It's what can we learn from marketing? Cheryl, as you mentioned, marketing, they're the storytellers. What can we learn from marketing in terms of how we engage our employees in ethics and compliance and sort of drive the messaging out? So, Will, I was interested in your thoughts around how do we do that? How do we actually leverage comms? How do we build a decent comms plan and get that connection out there into the community?
And I think the why and the how are so key in this because they're so intertwined. Because you could have a great why, but if your how is terrible, you've lost the initiative of the why, and it's never going to get across. So what we found was, to Asha's point, we do these live trainings on FCPA and bribery, and you can just watch the eyes glaze over, and the heads go down. It wasn't effective, but we did it right. We met the DOJ guidance, we did the training and everything. So we did the how, we communicated it. It wasn't effective though. So the why got lost in that message. So in a storytelling sense, what we figured out with working with a comms partner is they said exactly that. Tell a story. Make this relatable to your audience across the board. And so what we did was we created a Lonza True Detective stories. So we'll take actual incidences of misconduct, sanitize the names to protect the innocent or the not innocent or whatever the case may be. But we tell a story about it. That's kind of it's more of a 1950s throwback to a gumshoe detective and investigating this. And it's engaging and it's lively and it's a short read, but we're able to, within that story, do the why. And the why is why it's bad, why it ties to Lonza's code of conduct and kind of the ramifications from it. And we do it from two sides. We do it from the actual incidents of misconduct that somebody was, disciplined or terminated for, but also the wins. When people did the right thing, they did what they were supposed to do, and why that's good for the business. So blending that in came really from just kind of putting our minds together with comms and saying, we're not reaching our target audience. We're just completely losing them. So figuring out not only the why, but the how, and putting it into terms that are digestible and energetic and engaging, it skyrocketed to our most viewed column before. Whereas, my fun PowerPoint presentation on the FCPA, 13 views. Nobody wants to see that. In the meantime, it's just finding that way to engage it. And what works at one company is not going to work at another. But what it is figuring out what flows at your company and how to engage them and how to get that message across. And then you got the how and the why, and it actually leaves an impact and it means something to the employees. And that's your target right there, because then it spreads. So once you've got those mastered and you figure it out and you have trial and error and you figure out what works, what doesn't work, take it, build on it, improve on it.
Excellent. Asha, you've mentioned the hero's journey from a couple of different ways, but I'm not going to let you get away with that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I didn't even know what the hero's journey was until probably a few months ago, if I'm honest, right? Because I have been on this kick about thinking like a marketer, mainly because of all of these Instagram ads that keep convincing me to buy things I don't need. So marketers are doing something right? And there's a certain number of impressions that you need to have. There's some kind of association people need to have that emotional connection, and marketers get it right. and thinking about the hero's journey, and if you haven't heard of it, Google it, and you'll see some really good videos on what the storyline is of every single cartoon movie you've ever seen. And there is something about that we like to see: a distress situation, some aid coming in to help, and then a good ending, right? And so if that good ending is someone did the right thing, right, it's so powerful, because the ending shouldn't be make sure you don't do the wrong thing. The good ending is here's the prize when you do the right thing. And so just kind of changing that narrative is something we have to begin to evolve in, because that's where people make an emotional connection, right? And that's where, we really can make some impact, and it's so different and fun, right? We are known not to have fun training. And people dread it. We have to change that, because we really need people to get the concepts that are in our training, because they do matter. And so do we evolve that? And then I think, the beauty of what Cheryl and Will talked about with ECP, we may think that training is great. We may think that video is awesome. But if no one's watching it and no one's going to it, and the constituents don't agree, then we need to pivot and do something differently.
Absolutely. All right. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to ask each of you for your closing thoughts, a couple of nuggets from this conversation that we've had that you'd like to share with the audience as they walk away. And I will ramble for a moment so you can gather your thoughts, because I didn't tell you I was going to do this. But thank you, all three of you, for joining me today in this discussion. I really appreciate it. And I hope that out of this hour that we spent together, the audience has gathered some things they can take away and apply tomorrow in their jobs as we go through this fascinating time for ethics and compliance and society. I think it's so interesting to see this evolution happening and changing the dynamics of so many aspects of society. So with that, Asha, I'll pick on you first. Quick closing thoughts.
I knew you were going to pick on me. Two things. One we didn't get to that we talked about in the prep, which was, benchmarking and the importance of, really looking at data comparatively to what other programs are doing, and really measuring kind of what is your success, and how are other people measuring that success. And then, just yesterday was a tough day for a lot of people. And I think as we think about culture and we talk about what our data points are, we need to, as E&C, if we don't know what else to do, we need to check in on our people. And that's our businesses, that's our employees, that's everyone, because it is still a heavy day, and we still, as corporations and as E&C professionals, have a role to play. And so whatever your role is, play a role in the conversation, in the action, in the emotions, because it really does matter.
Yes, it does. It does indeed. Cheryl, closing thoughts.
Well, Will said earlier, it's no fun being the bearer of bad news. So I would challenge everyone, if you don't already have a program to recognize employees for the positive ethical things that they do, for demonstrating your values, for speaking up, for whatever it is that promotes the kind of culture that you're trying to support, then get one in place and use it. And I recognized 15 people this morning through our platform. And you can't imagine the excitement that they have when they get a positive note from the chief compliance officer. So it makes a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you. Will, your closing thoughts?
Very limited too. After Cheryl and Asha, I don't know how much further I have to add. I agree wholly on that. I think really quickly, don't be afraid to fail. Rome wasn't built in a year or in a day. What's going to work? You're going to have to try it 100 different times, but try it. You got to take that first step and you got to try it and you got to keep going and going and going. So just appreciate the time, Philip, appreciate my co-speakers here as well. And I hope everybody had a great session.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Everybody, remember, this is about the people. This is about humanity. We are changing society every day. And super excited to be on this journey with you all. And thanks the three of you for joining me today. Thank you all. Cheerio.
Thank you.
Philip.